Good afternoon, everyone. I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Besides thanking Father Ion, I want to thank the local pastor and clergy, Amber, who many of you know, who's also been so gracious and so kind to our community here. And we share much more than most people know and most people understand. And part of that has to do with the issue of human trafficking and modern-day slavery. Let me give you some introductory comments about the issue and the subject, because the average person knows very little, really, about trafficking and the issues concerning slavery. We usually think that human trafficking has to do with
drugs,
sex and the sex trade. It usually does not. Because trafficking and slavery is much wider and broader. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. It is a subject and it is an issue that has plagued society for centuries. Of course, you know of it from the Bible, right? Or if you don't from the Bible, you know about it from Cecil B. DeMille. If you don't know about it from Cecil B. DeMille or the Bible, perhaps you've gone to a card shop and you bought a card to give to someone that said Happy Passover. It's a recollection of situations centuries ago, not only in Egypt, but in Athens, where people were kept as slaves. And other cities in ancient times where a majority of the population of a city were slaves. They were either slaves or they were some sort of domestic helpers in some other aspect of life. But in our day and time, we see an emergence or re-emergence of the problem of slavery and human trafficking. There are about 25, maybe 30 million victims every year. 10% or so of the United States. 10% of the population of this country, because it's just over 300 million, right? So about 10% of the population is suffering because of this abomination. And those who suffer most are women and children. And they are the victims of the fastest growing of transcontinental crime. It's growing by leaps and bounds. It's growing because of the drug trade. It's growing because of the refugee crises. Not crisis, crises, because there are many. And it is also growing for other reasons that we usually don't think about. I read a book some years ago, My Name Lon. You Like Me? It's about a young woman in Southeast Asia. Her mother sold her into the sex trade for $14. But her mother did have one serious regret. She only got $14 for her. Isn't that a sad story? But I'll tell you another sad, real story. Every Tuesday evening, we gather the students. Where's Jamie? Or is he still here? There he is. For the OCF, right? But the Institute, he used to attend often. Almost every Tuesday. One Tuesday evening, a young woman came up to me. And I greeted her and I said, how happy we are to have you here. It's the first time I've seen you. Please come back. And she said, well, I came looking for you. And as we were speaking, I said, well, what can I do for you? She says, aren't you the clergyman who's working with the issues about trafficking? I said, yes, I am. And her eyes filled with tears. And she said, I'm a victim. So it's not outside. It's not the people next door. It's not the other community. It's not the other nations. It's in our own families, in our own homes, in our own backyard. From human labor and the victims of that, and there are various forms of labor. In 2014, the profit was about $150 billion. $150 billion. And in our day and time, you know, as people are forced into situations, one can basically buy a slave or a human being and force them to do all sorts of things. The average cost across the world for a human being, a slave, is $90. And do you know how much it was in the 1800s during the time of this great land to have a slave and to buy one? About 40,000. So humanity has become a commodity. We think of people as items. We look at them as if they're pawns on a chessboard. And we're letting people manipulate the situations. The worst form of human slavery has to deal with children. And children are forced into various types of slavery, as they are either trafficked or they are bought, sold, and on down the line. The worst form is what? Well, prostitution first. Second is child pornography. Then we have forced labor. Did anyone see Slumdog Millionaire? Then we have the removal of organs. People are trafficked for their organs. You have 2 kidneys, you don't need the one. So let's give it to someone else who can pay. If you don't believe me on that, all you have to do is watch Criminal Minds. Not only on the trafficking of human organs from living people, but other body parts from the dead. Children are also trafficked for adoption. And they're sold to a third party. People want a child. You don't have to worry about giving birth, you just buy one. And it's possible. And children are used as soldiers. You know, they're the ones that are sent out to find the mines. Haven't you ever seen the situations of children with no arms, no legs? Because they've gone out into the field. Now we have the issues of begging. How many know who the Roma or Romani are? So they are trafficked from Bulgaria and Romania and sent to Norway and Sweden, and there they beg for other people. And then we have young people who are trafficked or bought to become camel jockeys. Because they're small, they're lightweight, and of course it is for profit. And then there are those who are forced into marriage. Marriages are arranged between a 75-year-old gentleman and his 14-year-old bride. And she's been sold into that situation. We will never know or understand the long-term impact that these situations bring upon the lives of children. How many are freed and liberated? No one knows. There are no statistics. But there are problems beyond those which you think. And they have to do not only with the psychological issues and challenges, they have to do with real issues of disease, STD. You know what STDs are, right? Yeah. Sexually transmitted diseases, HIV, AIDS, on down the line. So what do we do, or what can we do? It's not a question to which there is an easy answer. And the most important thing right now, at least for me, is education. You have to educate yourselves to protect your children and your neighbor's children and the community. Because we always think, not my child. But when the white van comes and the door opens and the girl's pulled in and the white van drives off, then what will you do and say? So we have to take initiatives as communities, as people, as parishes, as a society. And this is not a political message. Please do not be so innocent as to think that some of those people who are coming across the border or coming here just looking for a job and food and hope, they're also the young people that are being trafficked and forced into situations. At the table that I was sitting, I made reference to a situation that took place in Greece. There's a young woman whose name is PhD Dr. Vasilia Vigidiki. She's from the island of Mytilene, from the island of Lesbos. She did her doctoral work on the study of the refugees, the people coming across from Asia Minor, from either Syria, Jordan, Afghanistan, Iraq, and on down the line into Greece, looking for a better day, coming with hope. Some of them coming as families, some of them coming as individuals. When some of them got to the area of Athens and had nowhere to turn, some of the young boys had to turn to prostitution. The average price for a good time is somewhere between 5 and 10 euros. You can imagine having to beg and live like that to exist. And it is not the fault of the Greek nation. It's not the fault of the EU. It's the fault of our world. It's the fault of our societies because we're not dealing with the realities of the situations. We're not doing something to stop the people who are trafficking, the young people, the mothers, the children, and on down the line. So, what can we do and what are we doing about it? A couple of years ago, the Ecumenical Patriarch visited the Archbishop of Canterbury. And in their discussions and in their dialogue, the Patriarch was admiring some of the work being done by the Anglican Church, the Anglican Communion, the Episcopal Church. You got to be careful when you're with an Anglican or an Episcopalian which term you use. So we want to be very inclusive here. So the Patriarch invited the Archbishop to come to Constantinople, to the Patriarchate. And we held there the first international forum between the Anglicans and the Orthodox on human trafficking. Sins before our eyes. And there we decided to form a commission between the two churches. The Anglicans would have 3 to 4 delegates, and the Orthodox would have 3 to 4. So, of course, here comes a time and the challenging moment. Who do you appoint? Because everybody wants to be part of a patriarchal commission. It looks very good on the resume. So, when we had a one-on-one talk, the Patriarch says, who shall we appoint? And I said, well, you really want me to be open and honest? And I have that tendency. I said, this is an issue about women. I think people with long hair and long beards and long robes can't really talk about those problems. It's just like a man trying to explain what it is to be pregnant. And he said, so? I said, and we appointed Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou, who deals with global affairs and situations. She's at Tufts University, and Maria Drosso, or Maria Drossos, who's a presbytera in Toronto, who has not only a business background, but also studying theology. And because it is a patriarchal task force now, they're usually headed by a hierarch, so I'm the hierarch. And we began to explore the ways that we can work together. When you work on these commissions or this type of cooperation, you want to give and you want to take. So we were going to give the Anglicans some of our theological material, because they said, you're much better off at that than we are. And when you write your articles, please let us use them. And we decided to take from their practical experiences and their programs, because they have very good programs and established situations, especially in England. And as we move forward, we decided to hold a second forum. And it took place in Argentina. If you've never been to Argentina, you've got to go. Buenos Aires is a hopping town. But we didn't go there for that. Or to visit Evita's grave, for those of you who remember who Eva Perón was. We held the second international forum in Buenos Aires. And why in Buenos Aires? It is a point of origin where trafficking begins to form a corridor coming up through South America, Central America, into the United States, going to Canada. It was very interesting to hear another story while we were there about people who come into Argentina to work in the fields. And when they are no longer able to work and they're of no use, do you know what happens to them? They're burned. So there is no evidence. There are no traces of what happened to these workers who were brought there as slaves in some way. And in this dialogue and in this program, we heard, for example, from an Orthodox nun who is in Kolkata, India. Sister Nectaria, who has an orphanage there in not an orphanage, which houses young women who have no place else to go. They may have one parent, because in Greek you could be orphaned by one parent. In English we usually don't think of it that way. Orfanapo mitera, orfanapo patera, but we don't think in that way in English. So Sister Nectaria came to speak about what the church is doing in a real way. Because these fora and these programs and this dialogue are all very nice, but they are theoretical. The question is, what are we going to do in reality? And how are we going to implement programs? So for that reason, some events will take place now. In January of this coming year, the third forum will take place in Constantinople, or in Istanbul. I just found out today is Sunday. So Friday morning at 5:30, I was called and informed. They don't have a clock. Oh, don't you know what time it is? I got coffee. So the third forum is going to take place, and it's going to deal with practical matters, especially those related to children. How we can push for legislation. How we can see that things are implemented in a real way. But it's not enough to talk about things internationally or in a theoretical manner. What can we do locally? Well, Metropolitan Gerasimos is on board totally with the program. So in Pasadena, at the parish of St. Anthony, we will hold a seminar for the community and for the outside community to bring in principals, psychologists, educators, maybe a doctor, policy people, to inform our own community and the greater society and community what can be done. Because you must become able to identify someone who is being trafficked. And then so that you understand that you are not Superman or Superwoman, Supergirl. That you are not able to save that individual because you endanger that person and you endanger yourself and your own family many times. What can be done to protect these people and to help liberate them and free them, because there can often be consequences. Because the bottom line is not the human being. The bottom line is money, profit. And these people who are trafficking young children and adults no longer care about human life. They are concerned just with their pockets. Not only will this take place in St. Anthony's, the parallel program will take place in Belmont. Are you happy? Yeah. That's her parish, that's why. It's going to take place in Belmont in a similar fashion. Because as a church, we're responsible not only for ourselves and to do for ourselves. We're responsible for the greater world and the greater community. We have to do something to make this world a better place than we found it. Our responsibility as individuals and as citizens of the kingdom of God is to make sure that this world is better, not now, but when we leave it. So we've given something or done something positive to assist the situation. You're going to ask now, what can you do? Well, there are things that you can do that are very practical. One, you have two communities functioning in one building by the generosity and the love and the grace of the Anglican Episcopal Church community. Yeah, that's a safe way to put it. So you have the ability to see what can be a common project. I know at the National Convention, as we were just talking about, where Pastor Amber is going, they're going to have a whole program. It's to let her come back and say, look, this is an initiative. Can we do it together? And I tell you, if we don't start working together, might as well just close all of our churches. We're not even Christians. We're not even human beings. We have to find a way to do things together. The next thing that you can do together as a community is go to the city officials and say, we want something done in this, I don't know, are you a town, a township, a city? It's a city? Well, some places are technically a village, some places a township. Don't want to be offensive, that's why. But tell the officials something needs to be done in the form of education, especially in the local school system, to warn children, to warn their parents. Because there is a misconception. People say, well, as society becomes more affluent and society has greater resources, won't this just disappear? It's just the opposite. People have more money to play with. They're able to do other things. People have money to find toys, whatever we want to call them and label them. So we have to do something. At the conference in Buenos Aires, we had a gentleman speak up as a gay man. And I think it sort of shocked the group there. But there are problems within the LGBT, and I'm not sure the other ones that follow, community. And these people also become victims. Whether you agree with their lifestyle or not, and this is not a judgment of moral or ethics, they're human beings who are being persecuted. And we must minister to them as well. Christ never discriminated. He showed his love and he shed his blood for every person. I got up at the conference and I just said that I realize that some people are uncomfortable with the situations and the discussion, but that's the reality. And whether we're comfortable or uncomfortable, and I think sometimes we need to be made uncomfortable. Because if you're comfortable, you just become a couch potato. But if you become uncomfortable, you begin to examine situations and look at them and ask, how am I going to address that? What can I do? So those are some simple things that could probably be done here, because when you go, and if you should go to City Hall or to the mayor or to your local congressional representative, it's much more powerful to say that we're coming here as united Christian communities, rather to say I'm the priest from the Greek Orthodox Church and I'm here for my handful of people or my great community. But when people go together in force and say, we put you into office and we're demanding now some results because you can be voted out. And maybe it's time that we vote out some people who've been holding offices too long and for the wrong reasons. Let me go back to the patriarchate for a moment. We are a patriarchate which has existed, 2,000 years? And our issues have been mainly theological, as you know. The great councils, even the council on the island of Crete, just about 2 years ago. We've perfected, we say in many ways, many aspects of theology. We're shifting situations. And we're shifting a part of our direction to look at the real problems of society. You know, the patriarch has done much about the environment and environmental issues and concern. And now he's saying we've got to look at those problems plaguing our world, because many individuals who are trafficked come from Orthodox lands and countries. And we need to address the problems of those suffering individuals. At present, we are the only Orthodox Church, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, to have a commission or a task force to address this. And it's become something all of a sudden everyone's interested in. So that means maybe we're doing things in the right way. Either that or they're going to lynch us at the next gathering we have. So I think it's important that our people are aware, because we usually get, at Christmas, Easter, Midsummer, these long declarations. The Holy Fathers of the Church said, blah, blah, and understanding the term of the Homoousios in the 4th century. I don't think our people care about those things anymore. I think they're very good and wonderful in their context. But I think people want to know what's happening in the real world and the problems of society. You want to know something? Sacramento is a hub for human trafficking. As is Los Angeles and San Francisco, San Diego. I told you it's not outside our community. It's not far away. It's here. It's present. And you should pray to God that that plague does not infect your family and your children. I'm going to stop, and that's why I came here to check the time again. You may have some questions, because they can be practical, they can be theoretical, and if you do have questions, I would be happy to answer them for you.
Is there an age that is more common that is being trafficked in?
It depends, because there are different forms what people are trafficked for. If you're looking for bonded labor, or there are those people also who sell themselves, into labor, and they think they're going to get out, but they don't. It's very hard to say, but of course, for prostitution, it's usually younger women or younger boys, depending on what type of prostitution. On the other hand, if you're looking for labor in factories, it's often become children now. So it depends on the situation. Yes.
So if we go to the city council to have this addressed, should we address it also with the refugee crisis, because they go hand in hand, both of them together or separately, or?
I think that you'd have to decide that on your own. But they do go hand in hand, and the refugee crisis isn't from the borders of Turkey into Europe, The refugee crisis is also on the border of the United States. And don't think it's only the southern border of the United States. There are many other countries that have similar situations and problems where people are trying to get in the hopes of a better day, time. So you'd have to decide on your own. Please.
And how can we trust our government or to speak to a person to help, to stop them? How can we trust others, you know?
How can you...
Good cops, bad cops, and...
Well, that's why you have to do the work on your own. And you trust in the church and the church leadership. I mean, the church is establishing programs. And the church is doing all sorts of things. And you have to, you know, you have to hold people accountable. When they are elected, you have to hold them accountable. All you have to do is say, I want to see your voting record. And you saw what happened with a judge, right? After the case in Stanford and the athlete. And that, I'm not saying if you agree or disagree. That's the voice of the people. The judge was recalled. Hey, you know what? Life's really tough, but when you make a boo-boo, you suffer the consequences.
Knowing from the airlines, I know flight attendants are getting trained to see the telltale signs of a distressed child, but they have a certain way of dealing with a child. They will pull it away and will ask a private question. What is the church doing to train, let's say, me or an individual to see those telltale signs of a child in trouble?
We're not yet. We're in the process of developing. That's the second part.
A guide.
It's going to take place in Toronto in August of next year, unless it takes first place in Istanbul. The problem is getting everybody together. That's the problem. There was a question over here, though, first. Excuse me.
I noticed a lot of, not so much here, but farther inland, new to me, this huge amount of migrant workers, and I'm sure most of them are here. I mean, I know people who work in that industry, but is there a population of that that's forced into that kind of work too?
All you have to do is read the book called Tomatoland. Read a book called Tomatoland, which talks about the state of Florida in some ways. And people who came as migrant workers who were chained to their beds and other things. So these are the realities. And let me just tell you, if you do nothing, you're guilty of indifference, and that may be one of the greatest sins. God gives us the opportunity in life to do something. I've become very passionate about this. And if we don't do something as the church, then we're not the church.
If you were to encounter somebody who was a victim of human trafficking and wanted to do something about it, and not directly yourself, would it be best just go to the police or the FBI or some other organization? What would be the best?
Well, there are all sorts of numbers that you can call. And that is the safest thing, for you to contact an official agency. Sometimes, and there have been cases where you go into a bathroom, and if you close the door, all of a sudden there's a note behind it. There are cases like that, asking for help. So the best thing, though, is to contact an agency. I don't know if I would always contact the government agencies. I may try some of the independent private ones. You know, because you want to see results. And the end result has to be that people are free. No one was born a slave. And we do not have the right to impose. There's only one type of slavery that I can accept. I became a slave of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And His truth. And He liberated me and He set me free. Okay? I heard something not too long ago on NPR about slavery in the South. And I'm from the South. And it just made me sick. It's disgusting how human beings had to endure and what they had to endure. And the indifference of most people. So when you can, you need to act. But I would be sure there are all sorts of agencies, there are all sorts of programs. And the thing is to make sure that that person is safe and you're also safe. I used to volunteer in a shelter for homeless youth when I lived in Chicago. And there were two rules. The first was that you could give no money, no cash, to to anybody on the street, to any of the young people, anything like that. The second thing, you could never give any information about yourself. They only knew my first name. Not my last name, not where I live, not my phone number, anything, not even my license plate number. So you can never be traced. Because you also don't want to become the victim of vengeance.
Just following to that question, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms is an agency, the Drug Enforcement Agency enforces drug trafficking. And I'm just trying to think about whether, you made a comment before, I guess, about not even necessarily turn to a government agency. I'm curious, who is the principal government? I presume it's a federal agency responsible for overseeing this. I'm curious if you have any information about how many people are caught and prosecuted and how severe the prosecution is, because at some point, if we're catching 2% versus 20%,
I don't have those statistics.
accountability.
I don't have those statistics.
It needs to be raised to a level of attention, I think.
And it's also, don't forget, it's something also very difficult to prove. You need to have really hard evidence. It's a very
I think
difficult crime.
last week there was a truck in Texas, I believe, 50 people in the back of the truck crashed, air conditioned, so they all lived, even if it was 100 degrees. But 6 months ago, same thing, 17 people back with a semi, they're all dead. Somebody's driving the truck, somebody's driving those people to and from somewhere, and the thing that bothers me most, because somebody asked about migrant workers, someone here is actually employing those people, or taking those people and using them. And those people tend to, it's kind of a cost of doing business, so people tend to look the other way in that issue, and they're probably as culpable as anybody in the whole transaction. We very seldom talk about that, but that's just.
No, I don't have statistics on that. And before I just, hang on. So this is my third job. My first full-time job is teaching, second full-time job is helping Metropolitan get Asimos. So this is my third thing. But it's the one I'm the most passionate about. Please.
Our government officials all need advice. I know our brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church freely give advice when it comes to this area. And we've gotten really good advice on what to do at the practical level here, at the ground level, with each of us. For the policymakers in our government, in light of me, I'll be providing advice to NATO leaders on how to handle this situation. What advice would you give from the perspective of the Orthodox Church?
Well, don't forget, of course, we're looking at things from, if you want to say, a moral, ethical, religious standpoint. Governments and military don't always look at things in that way and manner. So we're looking at the situation in a different manner. But we do have to hold people accountable. If we're knowledgeable of a transgression and a crime that has been committed, the person needs to be prosecuted. And we need to step up and do those things. And, hey, the time has come. Either we're going to stand up and be counted, or let's pack the bags and go home. These things have to stop. I mean, you can't have people dying in a car because they're being trafficked like that. Someone is paying for that. Someone's going to make the money. Someone's got to be held accountable. Not only for the crime, but also for the death. Those weren't just, excuse me, for the animal lovers, cats and dogs that just died there. Those are human beings with families. Those are people. That's the image of God, we say. And what are we going to do about it? So that's what I think we need to do. And make sure that there are laws in place. This is, of course, a new crisis that we're facing in many ways. I mean, even though it's been around, we've never really dealt with it. As I might quote NPR early this morning, we haven't even really addressed the issue of immigration. So we need to address some of these issues. And all these people in Washington, D.C., and I used to work there. I worked for the government in the House of Representatives. Half of them need to get out.
Amen.
You know, we talk about religious leaders that when you get to a certain age, you need to retire. Those people have fixed the laws so they benefit the greatest and the most. You know, Congress and the Senate conveniently exempt themselves from most of the laws which regulate salaries, retirement, this and that. They've conveniently, removed themselves from that. They need to be held accountable. They need to get out. Now, I'm not saying we got to get rid of everybody, because then we have no seniority, no knowledgeable people. But when someone reaches 80 years old, I think it's time for him or her to retire. And if they can't comprehend that, then we should pay for their psychiatric help to help them. Father Young, sorry to be, but I don't care anymore. I'm a hierarch already. What am I going to lose? Father Young.
Forgive my ignorance. Are there any countries or governments around the world that are more proactive than others? And are there any that are involved with such things?
Are there governments that are proactive in trying to fight this?
Yes.
I would say some of the European nations. Some of the European nations are very proactive. And that is, for example, England. And why is that? The Anglican Church pushed them and continues to push them. The Archbishop of Canterbury comes out and says things all the time. Yeah? That's just one example. Are there other governments which are more lax? Well, they're obsessed, or I shouldn't say obsessed. They're so overwhelmed with other problems. They haven't addressed these things. And what are those governments or those countries? You just look around the world. You talk about sometimes Thailand. Or don't think of only people who are going from one country to the next. When we talked about prostitution earlier, I mentioned HIV/AIDS. You know how the virus was being spread in India? By the prostitutes along the truck stops, the truck lines, moving up through India. So that's why when this gentleman spoke about the, LGBT community and disease, because he's dean of the School of Public Health at Rutgers University, so he wasn't just someone, off the wall speaking. It's the real problem how disease is being transmitted, which affects human life and the quality of life. So it's very hard to make just blanket statements. We have to be honest. Many times government officials and those in positions of authority, their pockets get lined and filled, and they just turn a blind eye. It does happen. It does happen. And it's not only in Europe or Southeast Asia. It happens in Canada. It happens here. It happens in Mexico. Well, it's the reality. But we have to do something. Charles?
As an individual, how can I recognize or identify the problem? What do I look for?
Well, that's why the two communities together may have an evening and bring in someone to speak about that. Okay? And also to speak to the parents. Because there are signs. If your child is becoming involved in certain things, there are signs the child's getting involved in the wrong things. So we need to prepare the parents as well.
When you were talking about the local level and the church going in a united way, what sort of things would you be asking of a town or a small city? What would you be wanting from them? What's practical for them to be doing?
If the city or the local government oversees or works with the school system, every year, mandatory program on how to tell or how to notice, how to identify the victims of human trafficking. Secondly, I would place security people on the borders, the boundaries of the school. So when you see that this van drives up, that it's all blacked out and there's no license plate, somebody's got to be there. So it's a type of awareness. Part of education. Those are the types that are very easy things to be done. And making students learn. Some schools already have implemented programs. These things need to be implemented so students know, because they're the ones who are the victims.
And it's just a statement. When I was living in San Diego, they've got a task force there. Their prosecution is so creative and wide looking in the kinds of things that they're charging the human traffickers with, so that they're not just further victimizing the victim, but they're making sure that different areas of the law apply to this crime that happened, and that they get convicted on
Something.
one or maybe multiple things, and they've tried to share that success with other areas that have a lot of human trafficking, like Santa Clara County and Chicago and Florida. And so those types of broad approaches, then they also share it with the police force who educate the students, and they are trying to share those with the different communities before it becomes a problem, so that then when people notice, because in San Diego they had a problem, all these girls were getting trafficked out of their own home back to their own home, and the parents are like, my kid's sulking, but maybe they're just a teenager.
Well, the other thing is parents need to monitor the computers. Cell phones, computers, all those things. Because it's what's causing all of the problems. Okay, do one more if we have one more question. Or not? No? Father Young, thank you everyone.